Talking Titans at NFL Draft this morning on Ramon, Kayla, and Will. RKW is brewed by 8th and Roast with Ramon Foster and Kayla Anderson. I'm Will Bowling. Joining us on the phones, he is ESPN's draft expert, Matt Miller, at NFL Draft Scout, where you can find him on Twitter. What's going on, Matt? How are you?
Doing well, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
All right, I've got to start with this because this has become a big conversation. Ramon Foster admitted to us this morning he has never heard of the shower beer. Where does a shower beer rank for you among the best places to consume a beverage?
Not that high, honestly. So, I'm from southern Missouri where, people are big on the shower beers because it gets so dang hot here in the summer. So, sometimes you got to hop in the shower just to cool yourself off a little bit. But I have friends who swear by this. My thing is, I don't want to get any water in my beer. I already drink Busch Light. It's pretty much water anyway, right? So, I don't need any more water in the actual beer. So, I understand them, but not super high on my list.
That's all right. Look, the Busch Light admission there, Matt, is why we have gone back to you and why we want to follow up on the draft conversations that we had with you last time. This is why we trust you.
I have expensive bottles of bourbon and stuff, and it's my thing is drink what you enjoy. And I'm not out there, again, it's 104 degrees outside in the summer. I'm not trying to slam IPAs. I'm not pressing anybody.
Fair.
My wife already married me. I'm good. So I would gladly spend $18 for 30 beers and have just as good a time as anybody else.
Matt, you get me, okay, and I get you in these moments.
I love it.
It was just shocking to me when they brought it up. I was like, why are we doing shower beers? And you know what? He just presented me with a crazy scenario. Cutting your yard on your lawnmower, having a brew, and then immediately after in the shower having a brew too. I can understand that.
I can do that. That I can do, yeah. But the pregame, let me hop in the shower so we can go out. I don't need to crack one just then. I can wait till let me get out of the shower, brush my teeth, then I'm opening one.
See, where Will got me a second ago was just I'm a bigger individual, right? So why would I waste time on beer when I'm trying to catch up? Just give me the bottle of Grey Goose if we in college. Okay? Give me that. Or if we really get into it, give me whatever tequila you got. We're on at that point, all right?
I love it.
I get right to it. I like that strategy.
I love it. Well, Matt, that's going to be the strategy. We feel like if Joe Alt is available with the number 7 overall pick for the Titans. But as we get closer to this thing, we start looking at all of the other scenarios. And if Joe Alt is not available at the number 7 overall pick, what's the likelihood of that in your opinion? And if that does happen, who's taking him in front of the Titans at 7?
Yeah, I would say it is possible. I won't say it's likely, but it is possible that he's off the board. I think if you are the Tennessee Titans, you are telling everybody you know that there are 4 really, really good quarterbacks in this class so that they all go ahead of you. And I think that's very likely right now, just looking at team needs, looking at strategy throughout what teams done this offseason. Feel confident 4 quarterbacks are going to go in the top 6. That's great news for you guys. If the LA Chargers stay at 5, they're the team you have to worry about because we don't know, right? With Jim Harbaugh, with Joe Ortiz, we don't know their strategy. We don't know their preferences and how they want to build this team. They have a good left tackle in Rashawn Slater. He's been banged up though, and he's coming up on a contract year. So could they draft Joe Alt and say, we're going to play Joe on the right side for 1 year, and then he's going to play left tackle, and we're going to clean some money off the books moving forward? Very, very possible that happens. If the Chargers either trade out of 5 to a team like the Minnesota Vikings who need a quarterback, or if they take one of the wide receivers, that's great news. You can, I think, breathe a sigh of relief if that happens next Thursday night. If Joe Alt is gone, I think you just take the best wide receiver on the board at that point. I really do. Even after adding Calvin Ridley, I think we're looking at Malik Nabers, Odunze, 2 guys who could dominate from the slot. Rome could play inside or outside, but amazing production, those 2 from the inside. So you're in a great spot. There's no consolation prize here. If Joe Alt's there, you take him. You feel great about it. If he's not, you take one of the great wide receivers and start to build the offense out that way.
Matt Miller of ESPN is with us this morning. Matt, when it comes down to we're talking about Joe Alt and everybody else's way it's broken down, is it somewhat surprising or shocking that the other guys behind Alt seem to be right tackles? What NFL is that right now that you have J.C. Latham and Talifuaga and a bunch of other guys who primarily played right tackle that could potentially be top 15 guys?
Yeah, we've seen that equality, if you have to have a great right tackle now. We've even seen teams like Kansas City. They paid Jawan Taylor, big time money, and they're skimping on the left side with Donovan Smith, who's a good player, but he's not making top tier money. And so we have seen the right tackle spot become really, really important. Last year, the two tackles drafted in the top 10, Paris Johnson, Darnell Wright, both played right tackle as rookies. So it says a lot about that position. I think what's most fascinating to me is that someone like Olu Fashanu has one bad game against Ohio State while he was hurt. And people have bailed on my guy. They talk about him now of oh my gosh, he can't go in the top 15. I don't see that at all. I think Olu's he was number 11 on my board, my final board that came out yesterday. I think he's a good player. There's some things you have to clean up in his game, but man, we could say that about all these guys, whether it be Latham, who I'm not as high on, or Fuaga, Troy Fatanu. There's so many guys in this class who are talented. There's obviously, a thing you might have to clean up in their game, but I think Bashanu's going to be a really, really good player for a long time.
And, of course, that's preseason. Pre-draft stuff that'll sift out on draft night. It's crazy how it always sifts out, Matt. On the other side of that, we're not hearing a whole lot about the defensive side of it, particularly the interior D-line. How are you – where do you place guys like Byron Murphy and Johnny Newton, as he's called now, if the team like the Titans have to move back because Joe Alt is gone? Where do you see those types of guys being drafted in the interior D tackle?
Yeah, I think Byron Murphy goes off the board. I feel like 16 where the Seattle Seahawks are at is probably his floor. He doesn't get past them. Johnny Newton, like you said, interesting player because he's been hurt in this pre-draft process. He hasn't had the opportunity to work out, and that makes him a tough player to evaluate. I saw him in person against Kansas in early September, and he was amazing. They had no answer for him, and they run a lot of outside stretch zone plays. They have a really good running back at Devin Neal. They have a mobile quarterback. It was Jason Bean that week. And he's running down these really athletic running backs and quarterbacks. I'm like, gosh, dang, this dude is all over the place. Then he has the foot injury, had foot surgery this offseason. That has really slowed him down. But I think his range is harder to pinpoint because he should come off the board in the 20s. Because of the foot surgery, because of the timeline, it might actually be in the 30s before he comes up the board, despite the fact that, in September we were talking about he was the best defensive tackle in college football. It just happened that things slowed down for him a little bit.
Matt Miller of ESPN joining us on RK Dub. So linebacker position is something that we've talked about. They definitely need some additions here. Obviously, Kenneth Murray in free agency they added. Who would be the best pair with a guy like that could possibly be a find in the draft?
Yeah, all of them, I think, pair really well with him. Adrian Cooper from Texas A&M, probably the first one off the board. He could come off the board in the first round, though. So you're definitely looking a little bit later than that. I love Junior Colson from Michigan. Played this year through a hand injury. He's got the big cast on the hand, but he is a rangy sideline-to-sideline type linebacker. I think would pair well with Murray's athleticism. He's probably someone that you have to take in the second round, though. He's a guy you're targeting with pick 38, which might be a little bit early for Titans fans who want to pull the trigger on a linebacker. Getting down to the fourth round where they had pick 106, Cedric Gray from North Carolina, Jalen Ford from Texas. Jalen had 6 or 7 career interceptions in college, really good player in coverage. I love Michael Barrett from Michigan. He might even be a round 5 type player, just because he's a little bit limited in his range, but this is a good productive linebacker class in the middle rounds to where you're going to be able to find, especially you don't need, that Jack Campbell type guy who went in the first round last year. You're not necessarily looking for that. You're looking for a complementary player. I think round 4, maybe even into round 5, you can find really good talent.
Matt, let's say they do take Joe Alt, possibly at 7 if they just have him there. And you talked about the wide receivers early on that will go. How about some of these wide receivers, since this is a deep class, that they could possibly get a little bit later on? Let's say even in the 4th round, since right now they don't have that 3rd rounder.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't know this was happening, but I tweeted right before I came on with you guys that the drop-off of wide receiver talent this year is pretty stark. In the top 100 players ranked, I have 19 wide receivers.
Ooh.
In the next 100 players, I only have 12. So there's a big drop-off. And in the 7th round even, this is a shallow pool of talent at wide receiver. So everybody here is oh, this is one of the best wide receiver classes of all time. That's true, but that's at the top of the board. That's not, in round 5, 6, 7. So, in round 4, Jermaine Burton from Alabama is a really talented player. He's been a little bit of a headache for them at that program. So you have to know, okay, are we willing to take on, a little bit of a player that we're going to have to stay on a little bit for the talent? Luke McCaffrey coming out of Rice. Really, really good slot receiver, pretty new to the position after being a quarterback early in college. He's someone that I would have my eye on. And I think with the Titans, and we even heard this a little bit last week, like they need that slot receiver. Like counting on Traylon Burks at this point, we all know that you can't do that. So Luke McCaffrey, Jamari Thrash from Louisville, Taj Washington from USC, those would be really talented guys for that role in rounds 4 or 5 to where you can get some of that value. I don't know that this is the year where you necessarily wait until round 7. I know they had 2 picks there. And, like, sure, you want to take a swing on a receiver who has, like, outstanding measurables in round 7. You should do that, but let's not count on that player. Even rounds 4 and 5, I tell fans all the time, like, hey, I might really like this player you got in round 4 or 5. There's a reason they're there. Like, those aren't players you're expected to count on. Think of those as depth pieces for 4 years. If they rise above that, you're winning at that point.
ESPN's Matt Miller is our guest at NFL Draft Scout, where you can find him on Twitter. Ranked the top 474 prospects on ESPN.com in this NFL draft. And, Matt, it's interesting. You've got Rome Odunze and Malik Nabers, 3 and 4 in this ranking. Let's say, for the sake of argument, Joe Alt is gone and Marvin Harrison Jr. we think will be gone when the Titans get on the clock at number 7. How do you separate Odunze's skill set to Nabers? And if the comp for Odunze is Jamar Chase, would he be the better fit than Nabers in this Titans offense?
That is tough because I think in my ranking of those two, they both had the same grade at 97. So it does come down to scheme fit and preference. Odunze would be great in this offense, absolutely, and he probably allows you to kick Calvin Ridley to the slot where he's such a great route runner. You could have a lot of success doing that. I actually lean for Tennessee a little bit more to Nabers because the yards after catch trait that he brings would be unique here, to where Hop is such a, he wins over the top 50-50 balls. Ridley's a great route runner, a possession guy. I think Nabers' yards after catch would be a little more intriguing here. And going back to that, finding somebody who could dominate from the slot, Nabers, 70% of his production was from the slot in college. So it's something that he's familiar with, he's comfortable with. You really couldn't go wrong with either of these guys. And I think Rome would eventually, you've got 2 really good receivers here. Both are a little bit older. Rome would eventually become that number 1 X wide receiver. D-Hop will be 32 next year. That's, it's rare to see wide receivers have any production over 30, and Calvin Ridley turns 30 in December. So you can always be thinking ahead. If looking at just 2024, I would lean Nabers for the Titans just, again, because that yards after catch slot ability that he brings.
ESPN's Matt Miller is with us this morning. Matt, at what point, if teams jump in front of you and the trades happen, we mentioned all potentially not being there, at what point do you see teams get nervous to where they have to take best available when it doesn't really fit their squad, or do you just live that life and say, hey, he was the best available player on the board?
I think you're always in that mindset of best player available. You can fudge that a little bit and be like, oh, our best player available just happened to be in a position that we have a gigantic need. We see that every year where teams say, oh, yeah, BPA. And it's like, no, you really needed a corner. Like, you can say BPA, but you're bypassing, all these other positions that still have really good players on the board. So we do see that. You're not going to run into that at 7 this year. That's the beauty of the way this draft class is loaded at the top, where we're going to see 4 quarterbacks come off the board. You're good there with Will Levis. So you're in a spot where it's going to be the best offensive tackle or the second best wide receiver will probably be on the board for you. And I would say those are the 2 biggest needs for the Titans. So it does work out really, really well to where you're going to get an impact player. I think the interesting part would be, like, do you consider a trade back if Joe Alt is off the board? Do you slide back, let a team come up for a wide receiver, and you still feel like maybe you could get, an Olu Fashanu in the early teens? Like, you got to stay ahead of Denver if that's your strategy, so you can't slide back very far. But it's at least something that you have to think about. If Chicago wants to come up and make sure they get one of the top wide receivers, if I don't think there's any world in which that 4th quarterback is still sitting there. If they are, then you could trade back to 11 with Minnesota. But those are the interesting scenarios to me with Tennessee, is the trade back. Because if they stick at 7, it's going to be Alt or a wide receiver, it feels like.
ESPN NFL draft analyst and insider Matt Miller joining us this morning. Matt, we had this discussion earlier on the show. There's so many needs for the Titans. One of those needs, and they could address this later on in free agency after the draft, but it is safety. And even with Amani Hooker, he is on a second contract. He has been beat up a little. There's not much depth at that position. Where could they look to in this draft at the safety position, or is it just one of those, it's not deep enough to be able to probably get one?
I think you could. Like, again, round 4 is kind of the sweet spot for safeties. Guys like Cam Tensions from Miami, who had a tough pre-draft process, just didn't test very well, despite the fact he was an All-American 2 years ago, had 11 career interceptions. He could be on the board there. Tyke Smith from Georgia, a little bit undersized, but he's a good, almost like nickel safety who could certainly be there. Jalen Simpson, another player I like in that range, just a little bit skinny. That's why he's going to be available in that spot. Bo Braid from Maryland could be there. So, yeah, I'm with you. And I think I love that you said this, because this safety class in free agency, we saw so many guys get released and then never get signed anywhere. So there are still really good quality safeties out on the market, to where it does feel like teams are waiting until after the draft at the safety spot, especially. But you know what? We'll add a Quandre Diggs or a Jamal Adams after the draft. Let's see where these safeties go. There's not a safety that I would say will be drafted in the first round. Let's see where these safeties go on day 2 and day 3. And then, we can add a Justin Simmons. We can add an Eddie Jackson. There's almost probably 10 starting caliber safeties just sitting out there on the market, and that it's not going to be at a high price point because of where we're at in the process. So I almost feel like safety is probably that spot like we were talking about, where don't reach, because you can get, you can find a free safety, and you could actually find a third safety on the market right now, and it's not going to cost you a ton.
Matt, your colleagues at ESPN have an interesting trade back scenario for the Titans in the second round, with the Titans moving back to 47 with the New York Giants, who would hypothetically be moving up to select Bo Nix with the 38th overall pick. What's the realistic range where you think Bo Nix and Michael Penix go in this thing?
And it is huge. So this is one of the peek behind the curtain. This time of year, one thing that I'm doing when I'm not on radio or TV is talking to agents so that they can tell their players, like, hey, here's a range so that you and your family don't have unrealistic expectations. If I were getting called by Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr.'s camps, I would say your range is like 12 to 40. It's huge, which it sucks. Like, you want to hone in closer, but we could see the Denver Broncos surprise us all. And at this point, it probably wouldn't be a surprise, but we could see Denver take the 5th quarterback off the board at 12. We could see the Raiders do it at 13. If either of those guys isn't drafted at 12 or 13, your weight becomes enormous, just like it did for Will Levis last year. We were talking about Will as a potential top 5 pick last year, certainly top 10, but we knew if he made it past that top 10, there was going to be a weight, because you get into that area of teams that just don't need quarterbacks. These are perennial contenders or playoff teams where, hey, they're not taking quarterbacks at this point. So for the guys this year, I would say if you get past the Raiders at 13, you're going to experience a wait, and it will be. You're waiting to see who trades up. The Giants could be that team that trades up. The Rams could be that team that trades up, but you're watching the ticker on the bottom of ESPN, waiting for that little chime that says, we have a trade, and it's somebody coming up to get you.
ESPN's Matt Miller has been our guest at NFL Draft Scout, a must follow if you love the NFL Draft, and if you're listening to us, you likely do, as far as the Tennessee Titans and the rest of the league are concerned. Matt, excellent stuff as always, man. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, guys. Thanks so much.
Yes, sir.
Matt.
There he is. ESPN's Matt Miller with us this morning, talking shower beers and quarterbacks.
Perfect.
Get you a guy that can do both.
I'm talking.
That was pretty good.
It was real good.
Coming up, we have got another big contract extension in the National Football League, and we have a person in sports media who is getting a ton of hate for something that is not her fault right now on Twitter. We'll talk about that next.